You've heard the words 1,000 times. It is finished. Maybe on a church banner. Maybe in a hushed reading during Holy Week. You probably assumed it meant something simple. Something like, it's over, or I'm done suffering. But that's not what those words meant to the people standing at the foot of that cross. Not even close. What if the most famous last words in human history were actually a legal declaration? What if they were something you'd expect to hear in a marketplace, not on a hill outside Jerusalem? Let's go back to the moment itself. Jesus is dying. His body is failing. And with what little breath remains, he doesn't groan. He doesn't whisper a prayer for relief. He speaks one word. In the original Greek of John's Gospel, that word is Tetelestai. It's a single term, compact, deliberate, and it carried a weight that most modern readers completely miss. So what did Tetelestai actually mean in the first century? Here's where it gets interesting. Archaeologists and papyrologists have uncovered thousands of everyday documents from ancient Egypt and the wider Greco-Roman world. Tax receipts, loan agreements, business contracts. And on many of these documents, when a debt was paid off completely, the scribe would stamp or write a single word across it. Tetelestai. Paid in full. This discovery came largely through the work of German scholar Adolf Deissmann in the early 20th century, who studied mountains of ordinary Greek papyri and realized that Biblical Greek wasn't some sacred, isolated language. It was the everyday language of shopkeepers, farmers, and tax collectors. And Tetelestai was stamped across their bills like a receipt. Picture that for a moment. A merchant hands over a scroll. The debt is settled. The word gets written across it. Done. Complete. Nothing owed. Now put that word back into the mouth of a dying man on a Roman cross. Does that change what he was saying? This wasn't a sigh of surrender. It wasn't Jesus finally giving up after a long fight. In the framework of first-century commerce and law, Tetelestai was a declaration of completion, a statement that an obligation had been met in full. Christian theology reads this as Jesus announcing that the debt of human sin, the very thing Scripture describes as a ledger against humanity, had just been paid off entirely, not partially, not on layaway, fully settled. But there's a second layer here too, one that historians of ancient religion point to just as often. The word Tetelestai also appears in temple and sacrificial context across the ancient world. When a sacrifice was properly and completely offered, when every ritual requirement had been satisfied, this same term could describe that fulfillment. Perfect. Nothing left undone. Which means Jesus, in a single word, may have been reaching into two enormous frameworks at once: the language of the marketplace and the language of the temple. Debt paid. Sacrifice complete. Have you ever tried to say everything you needed to say in just one sentence? Now imagine trying to do it in one word while your body is giving out. There's a third historical thread worth pulling on: the reliability of John's Gospel itself. Skeptics have long argued that the Gospels were written centuries after the events they describe, shaped and reshaped by generations of retelling, but archaeological evidence complicates that claim. The John Rylands Papyrus, a small fragment of John's Gospel housed in a library in Manchester, England, has been dated by paleographers to the first half of the 2nd century. That places a physical copy of this very Gospel, the one containing the words "It is finished," within decades of when eyewitnesses to Jesus' life would still have been alive. That's not proof of theological truth, but it is strong evidence that these words weren't invented generations later. They were written down early, and they were written down as spoken. So why does any of this matter to you, sitting here today, far removed from a Roman execution site 2,000 years ago? Because most of us carry an unspoken sense that we owe something, a debt we can't quite name. Maybe it's guilt over a mistake that still visits you at night. Maybe it's the quiet fear that you haven't done enough, been enough, earned enough. Christian theology takes that ancient commercial term and points it directly at that feeling. Paid in full, not payment plan available, not balance pending, finished. Think about the difference between a debt reduced and a debt erased. One still hangs over you. The other sets you free. Tetelestai claims the second. There's something almost jarring about how ordinary the word is. Jesus didn't reach for elevated mystical language in his final moment. He reached for the most mundane word available. The kind of word a fisherman would have seen stamped on a receipt after selling his catch. The kind of word a farmer would have heard when he finally cleared his debt to a landowner. Sacred truth delivered in the vocabulary of everyday transactions. Isn't that how a lot of the deepest moments in life actually happen? Not in grand speeches, but in small, precise words that carry enormous weight. And that reframes the entire scene, doesn't it? This wasn't a defeated man's last exhale. It was closer to a merchant closing a ledger, a priest completing a sacrifice, a judge announcing that the case is closed. 3 rolls, 1 word, 1 breath. Historians of Roman crucifixion, including accounts preserved by the first-century Jewish historian Josephus, describe how victims typically died slowly from exhaustion and asphyxiation, often unable to speak clearly at all in their final moments. Against that backdrop, a single, clear, deliberate word takes on even more significance. This wasn't mumbled, it was declared. So the next time you hear those 3 English words, "it is finished," maybe you'll hear something different underneath them. Not an ending soaked in defeat, an ending soaked in completion. Not a whisper of exhaustion, but a stamp across a debt that no longer exists. You've probably spent years assuming those words meant, "it's over." But maybe what was actually being said, in the marketplace language of an entire ancient world, was something closer to this: paid in full.